So today's session is called Scottish Dads at Work. As I said previously, the majority of the day we'll be talking about parents and dads, particularly experience of flexibility in the workplace, but we'll also talk about a bit about paternity leave and what's happening at a policy level, at national level, um, uh, for that, and the sort of carrying sort of cry for change within paternity leave, actually in parental leave more broadly. But before we get going on that, I thought for those of you who haven't been familiar with some of the dad survey stuff that we've put together recently, I thought it might be helpful to provide a little bit of context. So dads have been increasingly doing more unpaid childcare over the years. So back in the 1970s, when the women's liberation or women's sort of feminist movement was gaining momentum, dads were doing about 15 minutes of childcare per day, so not a huge amount at all. And from that point onwards, dads have steadily been increasing the amount of childcare that they were doing, but it's always really been mums taking up the vast majority of the childcare. So you can see pre-pandemic in 2020, sorry, 2014, 2015. This is supposed to represent a clock face. So the clock face on the left-hand side of this slide shows that for every hour that mums were doing unpaid childcare, dads were doing about 32 minutes of childcare, the equivalent of 32 minutes of childcare. So mums were doing about half as much again childcare as dads. But obviously, lockdown had a really profound effect on that kind of that imbalance between the amount of childcare that women and men were doing. As dads came back into the family home during the first lockdown, if you cast your minds back to March, April time in 2020, the number of minutes that dads were doing is about 53 minutes to every hour that mums were doing. So that was a significant increase. And actually, there was a piece of work done by the Fatherhood Institute at the time that showed that that period of change, that dramatic period of change within our culture, really improved the relationships between parents and their children. And I suppose at the time we were looking, we were doing our dad survey at the time, and we saw a similar trend. So dads coming back into the family home, taking on more of that childcare responsibility and not wanting to give up that experience. And cynically at the time, I thought, well, we'll get through lockdown and we'll get through this period of the pandemic, and then things will go back to normal. And that just simply doesn't seem to be the case. So all of this information is from the Office of National Statistics, but we can see by 2022, post-pandemic, that actually the number of hours or the number of minutes that dads are doing for every hour of time that mum is providing unpaid childcare has gone up from 32 minutes pre-pandemic to 39 minutes post-pandemic. So although it doesn't seem like an awful lot, actually, statistically speaking, it is actually quite a big change. So from our most recent dad survey, took place in June last year in 2024, and we had three key findings. The first was that dads remain committed to positive engagement with their children post-pandemic, despite increased financial pressure. So we all know the financial issues that many families are facing in Scotland and beyond at the moment. But despite that need for families to earn more, because of financial pressure, dads were committed to to doing more with their children. So we can see year on year, this is dads who are responding to our dad survey. We ask the same questions every year. In 2024, 40% of the dads who filled out our dad survey said that they were doing 25 hours or more of childcare. That's compared to 34% the year before and 37% in 2022. So you can see that certainly it's stable, if not a slight increase, which is really good. It's a really good sign considering how difficult the financial circumstances are at the moment. But the problem or the offset, the issue that we're finding is that many more dads are struggling to balance work and family life, particularly new dads and dads on the edge of poverty. So that's if you're familiar with the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, that's dads in SIMD 2 and SIMD 3. But you can see from June 2022, when only 5% of dads told us that they were finding balancing work and family life very difficult. That's increased in June 2024 to 12%. So more than double the number of dads telling us that they're finding that difficult. And I think this is reflected in the mental health results from this year's dad survey as well. So as you can see, almost half of the dads who filled out our survey said that their mental health was currently either not great or very poor. And I suspect that that's linked, or it is actually linked to this financial pressure on families at the moment. So that's just to give you a little bit of context of what dads have told us in the last year, and just the wider context around the COVID effect. And without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Jenny, and I'm going to stop sharing my slides for the minute and let her share hers, I think.
Thank you. Right, let's see if I can get mine up. Good. So my name's Jenny Legg. I work for an organisation called Flexibility Works. If you've not come across us before, we are a social business. Primarily, we work with employers, trying to get them to create more flexible working, showing them how it benefits the business as well as people. But another important part of our strand is looking at how flexible working can help reduce poverty and trying to address some of the inequalities that exist in flexible working. The more you earn, the more likely you are to work flexibly, and the less you earn, the less likely you are to work flexibly. And yet, so many people, including lots of parents, need flexible working in order to work at all, and certainly to stay in work and progress at work. So we do a big research piece each year, and what you're looking at is the two covers. At the moment, we produced two reports that were published in March, and I will share the links for these. The first one on the left is our kind of big picture overview of what is happening with flexible working in Scotland, and looks at data for workers, unemployed people looking for work, and employers. And the report on the right is very specifically looking at parents' experiences of flexible working and their efforts to find flexible jobs. So I'm going to run through some of the findings across both of these, if I can move my slides on, which right now I can't. Oh, there we go. So looking at our kind of overview report, who's working flexibly right now? 67% of all workers have some kind of flexibility in their role. Another 18% don't work flexibly but would like to. And that means that the very vast majority of workers, 85%, either have flexible working or want it. When it comes to parents, parents tend to have more flexibility in their role. About 75% of mothers work flexibly and 77% of fathers work flexibly. And I will look at some of the differences in what types of flexibility they use in a moment. I've mentioned already that salary is a big differentiator in whether you can work flexibly or not. That's one of the bars at the bottom. And the other kind of key difference is whether you're in a frontline or desk-based role. So again, looking at the types of flexible working, people use. Each of these bubbles represents a different type of flexible working, and it's probably no surprise the biggest bubble is some home and hybrid working. That is the most common type of flexible working that's used. Now, the data on this slide is for people who say they work flexibly. So 46% of workers who work flexibly use hybrid and or some kind of home working. And the next biggest or most common type of flexible working is some flex on your start and finish time. So it might be that instead of coming in at 9, you can come in at 8:45 or 8:30 or 9:15, and again, just adjust the end of your day so that you still work all your hours, but you have a little bit of control over when you start and finish. But there are many, many different types of flexible working, and this slide just illustrates some of those. So when it comes to parents, I've not compared all the types of flexibility. I've just pulled out the ones where there are the biggest differences. And the main difference is that dads are more likely to work from home either part of the time or all of the time, and mums are much more likely to work part-time. And this largely comes back to people's main reason for working flexibly. And while we are making progress on kind of gender equality, at the moment, mothers are more likely than fathers to say that childcare is their main reason for wanting to work flexibly. And that drives mothers' need in particular for part-time hours. However, this table shows a question we asked, how many hours ideally would you like to work each week? And we were at pains to point out to people, if you say you want to work less than full time, you're going to have a less than full time pay packet to match. So pointing that out, only 36% of fathers said they wanted full-time hours, and about 65% said they wanted less than full-time hours. So I think this chart is interesting because only 7% of dads are actually working part-time hours, and yet this piece of data is suggesting that there's a lot of unmet demand among dads for part-time hours. And I'm going to discuss in a few minutes why that might be the case. This slide is going back to data for all workers, so this isn't parent specific, but I think there's a lot of interest in hybrid at the moment and what's actually happening with it, so I wanted to share it. You've probably seen some of the headlines in the news recently about various companies and CEOs calling people back to the office, and our data isn't really showing that. This slide is showing data for all office or desk-based workers. So not just those who said they worked flexibly, but anyone whose job is office or desk-based. And we asked people whether or what they'd been asked to do by their employer in terms of how often they needed to come to the office. And we found we could group people into these kind of rough sections. So about a quarter of office workers, so they have complete freedom on when they come to the office. There are no stipulations on how often they come in. Then there's a middle kind of chunk, about half, who say they have some kind of hybrid arrangement. So that might be they have to come in a certain percentage of time. It might be they have to come in set days. There were all manner of possible kind of hybrid arrangements, but it is hybrid. It's a blend of home and office. And then about 1 in 4 say they have to be in the office all the time. Now, we were able to compare our data with another data set we collected about 18 months previously from, I think it was sort of summer 2023. And I was expecting to see a shift towards office time, but there really was not any difference at all. Maybe it will shift slightly over this next year. As I say, our data was collected last October, November, but we really weren't seeing any shift back towards the office. And what our data is showing is that 75% roughly of all office workers are working hybrid. So even if there is a small shift, the vast majority of office workers are still going to have some kind of hybrid arrangement. Just look briefly at frontline workers. So 64% of frontline workers told us they do have some flexibility in their role, but among those who aren't working flexibly, there is high demand for flex. So 62% of those who don't work flexibly say they want to. So there's still a lot of unmet demand in this group too. Ooh. So we looked at the business benefits of flexible working as stated by employers. 72% of them thought that flexible working was good for their business overall. And we asked them about the kind of top five benefits. So they said that flexible working improved work-life balance, helped them retain good staff. I can't read this one. There we go. Improved mental health and well-being for workers, reduced sickness and absence, and helped them maintain overall business productivity. And then, interestingly, given those hybrid figures I've just shared, 95% of employers said that they thought flexible working in their own organisation would either stay the same or increase over the next year. So again, when we're thinking about, well, is everyone about to be called back to the office, or is everyone going to be told that their flexible working is done and over? It really doesn't look like that. We also asked employers what their biggest challenges are around flexible working at the moment. And the biggest one by far and away is that they're just worried about how to have these conversations with employers without raising expectations that they then can't fulfill. And they're also worried about how to make flexible working fair. Perhaps they've got a mix of frontline and desk workers, and they can't offer the same sorts of flexibility to everyone, and they just don't really know how to move forward from that point. Having some senior managers who are opposed to flex and are basically blocking flex is a problem for 4 in 10 employers. Some say they're struggling to get people on site as much as they'd like. And again, this last point is kind of going back to the first one, that they're worried if they offer more flexible working, it's going to open the floodgates or raise expectations. So that's it on employers. I'm going to move to a bit more parents' data now from our parents' report. So some of our data looks at how important flexibility is for helping people get into work. As I say, part of our remit is around how flexible working can reduce poverty. Now you can have a job and be in work and still be in poverty, but it's certainly helpful to have a job. So 28% of all unemployed parents said that if they could find a flexible job, it would mean they can work flexibly when previously they've not been able to. And this is highest for mothers at 37%. I think the figure for fathers was 26%. So what we find is that those sort of gender norms where mothers look after the children and the fathers are the breadwinners, that's more prevalent in parents who are not working. So that's what we're seeing here. And we also looked at what the impact was on people applying for jobs. So we asked people whether they'd seen a job in the last year that they wanted to apply for, but the advert didn't mention any flexible working, so they didn't apply. Now, this affected mothers the most. So nearly 6 in 10 unemployed mothers said, yeah, I've seen a job, I wanted to apply for it, but no flexible working was mentioned, so I didn't apply. And this is followed by parents with a child under 5, parents who live in poverty, and then that's the average for all unemployed parents. Sorry, I'm skipping about. Now, the figure for fathers was 31%, so it's quite a lot lower. So I'm going back to that point that in this group of parents who are not working, those gender stereotypes are much more prevalent. And whereas I think I said among working parents, about 6 in 10 mothers say that childcare is their main reason for wanting flexibility, compared to 4 in 10 fathers. When you look at the unemployed cohort, this shifts quite dramatically. And I think it's like 75% of mothers and 25% of fathers. We asked people who were in work, so parents in work, what that meant for them. And they said that it means that for many of them, they can work when it's just not been possible before. Sorry, can't control my slides. So the average for all parents was 15%. So that's 1 in 7 parents who are saying flexible working is basically a gateway. It means I can work when I've not been able to before. There's not so much of a gender difference here. It's more about having larger families or whether you live in poverty or not. And we've defined poverty as being in a household where there are 2 children and a household income after tax of £2,500, or if you have 3 or more children, of £3,000. And that is, we've got that at the beginning of our report. And we looked at who would have to stop working if their flexible working was taken away. And it was parents with a disability or long-term health condition for someone in their household. So it might be them or it might be someone else in their household. But it was 31% said, I'd just have to stop working. If my flexible working was taken away, I just wouldn't be able to work. And that was followed by parents who are on low salaries, those who live in poverty, and then the average for all parents was 18%. So that's 1 in 5 parents who work flexibly that say, do you know what, if this flexibility ended, I'd just have to stop working. There'd be no alternative. We looked a little bit at progression and what flexible working delivered for parents here. So about 1 in 5 parents feel they work below their skill set, and there's not really any gender difference here. But when we asked why are you working below your skill set, then there was a gender difference that came through. So among parents who feel they work below their skill set, 46% of mothers feel this is because they can't find the flexible working they need to work at a higher level. But this does go hand in hand with the fact that many more of them work part-time. And you'll see that another of those donuts there is 44% of parents who work part-time feel the same, that they just can't find the flexibility they need to work at a higher level. We asked questions around culture as well, and this is where things get harder for dads. So more dads than mums feel their employer does not support their childcare obligations. And more dads than mums say they'd like to be there for their family more and feel that flexible working would help them to do that. And finally, more dads than mums say they'd like to work more flexibly, but don't feel it's acceptable to ask. And then the kicker for the dads is that when we asked who's had a flexible working request turned down in the last year, fathers were pretty much top of the list. So that's 3 in 10 fathers say, I've asked for flexible working in the last year and I've been told I can't have it. And that's followed by parents in frontline roles, parents living in poverty, and the average for all parents is 25%. The figure for mothers is 19%. Now, we don't know what people asked for. We don't know if their flexible working request was reasonable or completely mad, but there's quite a big difference between the number of mothers and the number of fathers who are being turned down for flexible working. So it does suggest that there's some bias or some unconscious bias in those decisions that are being made. So I'm going to finish briefly just with a couple of positive stories about the difference flexible working can make. So this is Ian Redley with his lovely twin daughters. He's a design engineer for Almond Engineering, and he starts and finishes 20 minutes earlier than most of his colleagues. He does start quite early. It's about 6:30, 6:45 in the morning he starts, but he finishes at 3 o'clock and he can go and pick up his twins from school. Now, if he couldn't do that, he and his wife would have to pay literally hundreds of pounds a month in after school care. So they make that financial saving and he gets to be around for his daughters, which sometimes is lovely and delightful and sometimes is probably less delightful, but it's great that he can be there. And from a work perspective, he's told me like he's a real early bird. He can be in early, can kind of smash through loads of tasks while he's really alert. And so his employer gets a bit more out of him as well. And another Ian, I don't only talk to Ians, it's a coincidence that these are both Ians, but this lovely Ian is a single dad. He is an accountant and he works full time and he's mostly in the office. So his flexibility is quite minimal. But if his son is ill, he can work from home. If there's something on at school, he can just go and do it. If there's a doctor's appointment, he can just go and do it. And the word that really struck me was his relief. He talks about the relief that this brings, that this very small amount of flexibility just means that he can balance his job and being a dad. So those are just a couple of examples of how flexible working can work really well for parents and dads in particular. But it does seem that those gender norms are still kind of going strong in many cases, and that when dads do try to work differently, either they don't feel able to ask because the culture doesn't feel supportive, and that when they do ask, often they're told you can't work flexibly, which just exacerbates that culture. That's that's the end of my bit, so I will stop sharing there.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I've learned so much. I've taken lots of notes. If you've got any questions, um, either just pop your hand up virtually or using the old-fashioned hand in the air method, or you can pop a little question in the chat box. But I have some kind of, just as you were talking, I was making some notes and thinking about what you're saying. Um, and I was just wondering, with so many dads being turned down for flexible working, or there seems to be that a really big difference between mums and dads there. Have you got any tips to help parents in general, but specifically dads, have those conversations successfully with their employers? Is there anything that you kind of suggest that might help having that conversation?
It's a good question. I think there are a few things that you can do. Obviously, you'd want to have a think in advance about what it is you're asking for, being ready to explain. You don't have to now legally give a reason as to why you want flexible working, but I think sometimes it helps your employer just understand where you're coming from if you can share a bit of information about why you need it. It might be, look, I just really need to finish early on Thursday because I need to go and collect the kids from wherever. So being able to share that bit of information can help. Suggesting it as a trial is another way that can help. So look, like, I'm not necessarily asking for a permanent change, although obviously that's what you really want. But to kind of, sometimes employers need it proved, they need it demonstrated that it is going to work and it's not going to cause a problem. So suggesting it as a trial can help too. They're probably the ones that are the most straightforward to sort of take on board for advice. And I guess maybe thinking about, if you are going to finish early, say, for example, what's the risk from the employer's perspective? Is a client or a customer going to call up and you're not going to be there? How could you kind of mitigate for that? Is it that, you know what, you could just put a divert onto your mobile, so you say, look, if anyone calls me, I can still pick up the phone, or I can call them back as soon as possible? Or is it that a colleague can cover for you, but to try and sort of think ahead as to what might the issues be, and is there a kind of simple solution that I can kind of get in there first and suggest first before they worry about it?
Excellent. So mitigating the risk, bit of a trial is a good idea, actually. And I suppose just doing it ad hoc. Is it more, is your experience that it's more difficult um, for parents to ask for something more structured for their contract to be changed, essentially, rather
Yeah,
than just asking for that ad hoc kind of relief?
yeah, definitely. And if you want a contract change, then that's a more formal request. That is a statutory request. Um, and it's likely that it's going to be a bigger change. So the kind of the impact of that might be bigger. Whereas if you just want to finish early one week to go to something on at the school and you can pick up the time later, that's much more straightforward. But employers do have, a duty to consider all requests for flexible working now. They don't necessarily have to agree to it, but they do have to consider it, and they have to give a good business reason why they're saying no. If they're saying no, they can't just say, I don't think that'll work. They have to give a good reason.
Excellent. Una, you've got your hand up. Lovely to see you. Well, I can't see you, Una, but lovely to hear from you.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you too, Kathy. Thanks very much. And thank you, Jenny. It was a fantastic talk. And like Kathy, I'm thinking so much that you said. But I've listened to a few talks about flexible working, and I can see all the advantages for the person who's being allowed to work more flexibly. And I've heard a lot of reports about their improved efficiency and their motivation, these things. But what I've never heard is the impact on the rest of their team. And particularly my own work has been in healthcare, and I'm thinking you can't adjust the workload in the way that you might in a managerial job or an office job, where you could say, I can do that work after 5. But if somebody comes in sick, they need to be treated when they come in. And so I've not heard anybody talk about the reaction of the people left behind, if you like, when somebody goes to collect the kids. Do the other people in the team pick up their work while they're not there? Or are the managers able to put in somebody else to do their job when they're not there? Those are the kind of practical things that I encountered at times in work, and I haven't seen it addressed in any evidence-based way. The only experience I had that really worked was job sharing, where people worked out between 2 people how to get the work done. And that at the time seemed to be a great idea. It was usually mums who shared the jobs, but that's not what's meant now with flexible. Sorry, it's a bit garbled, but I hope it made sense.
Yeah, and you raise a really good point, and I think this is part of what employers rightly consider. What is going to happen to the work if you're not going to be there? Does the work need to be done at that time in that place? And if it does, who is going to pick it up? So that could be a legitimate reason for an employer saying, do you know what, this isn't going to work. But I guess what we would hope is that employers should have conversations with people about how they could mitigate that across the team. So as you say, it might be that a colleague could swap a shift. It might just be a shift swap that would work in that case, or it might be that more staff are needed. I know some employers have lots of staff who then work various shifts, but they know they've got enough staff kind of overall that they can fill in some of those gaps if things like that happen. But you're right, it's not a straightforward one, and it is a genuine business consideration, and you can't just let people skip off to go and do whatever in their personal life if the job still needs to be done at that time in that place. But I think my kind of caveat on that, back to the employer, is, does that work need to be done at that time in that place? Now, clearly, if you're in a healthcare setting and, as you say, someone comes in sick, then that work does need to be covered. But a lot of roles, perhaps the work doesn't need to be done at that precise moment in that precise location. And that's something other employers can look at.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Paul Mercer has asked a question. Paul, do you want me to ask on your behalf, or do you want to ask Jenny yourself?
Oh, you can ask if you want. My accent's quite bad, so.
Oh, I don't know. I can understand you. I'm sure Jenny will be fine.
So the question was, you mentioned that flexibility works with employers. So how do you approach employers, or do they approach you?
It's a bit of both. So we do get people coming to us. It's a lot of word of mouth, but we also do a lot of events or go to various kind of business shows, things like that, we are always very proactively looking for organisations to work with. And we do get some government funding so that we can provide some of our services free for employers, depending on where they are and what sector they're in, perhaps. So, for example, we've got a project in East Renfrewshire at the moment where we can offer some free consultancy and some free training. So we are finding businesses through kind of local networks there. Yeah, otherwise it's we're doing the kind of usual sort of marketing activities of events and our website and trying to reach people on social media. Often the people who perhaps need the help the most, or the organisations that need flexibility the most, aren't necessarily looking for us. So part of our job is trying to reach these organisations and show them that flexible working could make a difference for them.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
So I was just thinking, obviously, at the top of the discussion, we talked a little bit about paternity leave being very much part of the public consciousness at the moment. It's I suppose I'm seeing it through the prism of being in Dad's work all the time. So I'm seeing an awful lot of press activity around paternity leave at the moment. And I suppose more broadly, Jenny, it's this discussion, and you picked up on it, around these gender norms, actually, and shaking these gender norms. And I had a question really about whether, I know that you've been working with Flexibility Works for a while, and I can't remember whether you were working with them pre-COVID or not, but I'm just interested to know, or to get your perspective on whether you're seeing a shift in the gender stereotypes around flexible working and part-time working around men. Are you seeing any change? Because obviously there's a kind of growing demand, certainly for paternity leave and better rights for dads at that point at which they're becoming fathers. And I was just wondering whether you're seeing anything similar.
So I would say, without having stats in front of me, I think there has been a shift in that more men and more fathers are working flexibly. But a lot of this shift is around location. So a lot of it is around being fathers working from home, perhaps being fully remote. I don't think there's been much of a shift in fathers working part-time. I'd need to double check that. But given we're at 7% of dads saying they work part-time, I don't think that's shifted very much. There's probably been a small shift, but the majority of the shift has been in dads working from home, which is still really valuable for family life. It's a good step in the right direction, but there's still a lot more progress to go.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? The dad survey, I would say, certainly there was real concern. And actually, I wonder whether you can maybe talk about it. You might have some experience from your end. There was real fear around job loss and job security with the dads who were responding to the dad survey in the last year. And I wonder whether that's another factor in dads not wanting to ask for too much flexibility, or not wanting to seem like they're not content in their workplace. Essentially, there's that kind of anxiety around losing their jobs. And I wonder whether you're seeing a little bit of that as well at all in your family, with mums as well, actually.
Yes, so we do kind of change our questions a bit each year, but I know we've asked in the past something about kind of career progression and how flexible working is perceived. And there's definitely a concern among all workers that if you work flexibly, and it's particularly part-time, but if you work flexibly, that managers won't think you're as committed, that you're more likely to be overlooked for promotion. And so it's understandable that dads would look at perhaps what's going on with the mums in their workplace and going, well, I don't want that to happen to me, so I'm not gonna go part-time because I can see Josie over there hasn't been promoted in 5 years. and so they don't want to take that risk.
And is that, do you know if that's perception or whether there's a reality around that?
I think it's a bit of both. There's definitely, because we ask employers as well questions about what they think about flexible working, and again the questions do change year on year, but we've definitely seen that some managers still think that flexible working is bad, and that if you work flexibly you're just not as committed to your job. And those employers, those managers, clearly aren't going to help people work flexibly. And if you do work flexibly, they're not going to give you the good projects and the better roles, because they've got to be in their bonnet that you're doing the wrong thing. So some of it is fact, but then beyond that, there's probably another layer of parents who are not asking because they fear they are going to be judged, when in reality they won't be judged, but there's enough actual judgment going on that it creates that sense of concern and fear more
Yeah,
broadly.
yeah. I might just share my slide again. So, as I said, there's been an awful lot of discussion about paternity leave and the Dad Shift campaign, which is two guys down in London, who Dads Rock. There's some people from Dads Rock on the call. Hi, Rachel. Have been working very hard with Dad Shift, and we have as well, actually, over the last couple of years. And they're calling for reform in the statutory paternity leave. So obviously, individual employers will have their own policies around paternity leave. But there's a kind of growing call for improved paternity leave. And I'll just see whether I can share my screen. So the Dad Shift campaign are looking to create a dad strike on the 11th of June. So that's just around about the same time as, or the run up to Father's Day. And just in case you didn't know this, hopefully you all will, but currently the UK's paternity leave entitlement is the worst in Europe. So new dads and non-birth parents only get 2 weeks of statutory leave. Self-employed dads currently get nothing at all. They're not entitled to anything. And this information came out, I stole this information recently about paternity leave compared to the national living wage. So statutory paternity leave works out to about £187 per week, which is the equivalent of just under £5 per hour for a full-time worker on 37.5 hours a week. And that's 59% less than the national living wage. So Parliament has been discussing amendments to the bill in the last 2 weeks, and it has committed to a paternity review, but hasn't confirmed a date. And it is also committed to bringing paternity leave in line with shared parental leave and maternity leave. So your dads basically are allowed to ask for paternity leave at the point that they take up a job, but it requires 15 weeks before they're actually eligible to take it. And I was just wondering whether, so to me, I suppose these changes in paternity leave can do an awful lot to changing the sort of gender stereotypes around mums being the sort of go-to caregiver, I suppose. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on it, Jenny, whether you think that it would have making those changes around paternity leave would signify a bigger change around gender norms within the workplace.
Yeah, so I don't have any data on this. So this is just what's in my head, Kathy, for what that's worth. But I think it would. I think it would help set the tone and set the expectations better around how fathers can be more can do more at home, can be more active fathers. I think so many employers and dads just accept the way things are. And I say that being one of these people who has just accepted things. I am a feminist, and yet when my husband and I had children, there was no discussion about who would change their work pattern. It was just accepted between us that I would change my work pattern. And I feel a bit cross with myself, to be quite honest, when I look back, that I didn't question that more and say, well, what about you? Can you change your hours? But we are just brought up to live these gendered lives, and until the government makes a change in the law, I don't think enough people will question how things could be done differently, and I can count myself in with that. But I think a lot more dads would be thinking, oh, actually, how can I keep spending a bit more time at home if they'd had more time off in those first few weeks? Whereas, the baby comes along, and it because of how our current system is set up, the baby is instantly, it feels like the mother's responsibility much more than the father's, and the father is expected to go straight back out to work. And yeah, I think it would help change mindsets if dads had more time at home at first.
I think, yeah, I mean, that's my sense. I'll stop sharing this slide actually. Um, yeah, I think that's my sense, is that it's about setting the tone culturally, actually. And I did a presentation, it's probably about a year ago, about Sweden, and they started changing their policies in the 1970s. And actually, now, if you're not an involved sort of male caregiver in the first year of a child's life, then actually, that's perceived as sort of bad parenting in a way. Like there's a real cultural shift around that. I mean, and it's worth noting actually, even though there's far greater parity in the amount of statutory leave to both parents, mums are still taking up the kind of the greater burden of care. So even though there's kind of the government have stepped in to create equity, actually mums are still doing more in Sweden, but certainly it's far more equitable. So yeah, I think probably it's a good step. But I'm interested if there's any downside, or there's any perceived downsides from an employer's point of view with improving sort of statutory leave. How would employers perceive that?
Yes, they perceive it as more work and might cost them more money, is my kind of brutal answer. We know that the kind of recent national insurance hikes have kind of spooked employers, and they are still grappling with post-Brexit changes and kind of increased costs on things. From the conversations we're having with employers, it feels like they are just up to their eyes in managing what they've already got to deal with, and they don't feel they can cope with more change on top. And if we do create better rights for fathers, that will mean it's going to mean more work for employers. Now, of course, the flip side of that is that you'd perhaps retain good fathers in your workforce, and there's kind of benefit for that. That people will be more committed, more engaged, more productive potentially. So there are benefits, but I think employers just see that kind of immediate, oh gosh, I'd have more paperwork to do, more HR stuff to do, and cash flow perhaps would perhaps be more pressured. I think that's where they are with it right now. Even though personally they might agree with it, they just look at the kind of cost side of things and the kind of resource side of things, and see some problems.
So the outlay for them, and I guess the change, actually dealing with the change of that policy, is going to affect them, and there's no guarantee of a positive outcome for them, I suppose, actually, although I suspect there probably would be. certainly the Joseph Rowntree Foundation said that there would be a significant benefit from the adoption of a 6 weeks paternity leave at 90% of a father's wage. So it'll be interesting to keep tabs on what's happening over the next little while, that's for sure. And I was just wondering whether that you had any kind of final thoughts. We've got a few minutes until the end of the session, or any tips for dads, particularly actually, who maybe want to spend more time looking after their children and don't really know how to approach their employers. Anything that you think actually this would be really helpful for them, or any resources, anything that would help them?
That's a good question that I really ought to have prepared for, Kathy, isn't it? In terms of resources, so we've definitely got a page on our website about how to ask for flexible working. So that's a great resource to use. I'll pop a link to that shortly. But I think looking within your organisation, are there any dads already working flexibly that you could kind of reference? Definitely, as I say, thinking about any of those kind of mitigating circumstances, if you can anticipate what issues your employer or your manager might have and how you could resolve them, that would be good. Suggesting a trial is another good way of doing it as well. And usually just starting with a conversation with your line manager, before you get to kind of perhaps making a statutory request. It depends what you're asking for, but starting with your manager and just explaining, like, actually, I'm just trying to find a way that makes things a bit more straightforward, and talking about how it's going to help you at work as well. So if you're coming in and you're feeling really stressed because you've just done the nursery run and you're racing to get to the office for 9 o'clock, or wherever you work, showing your employer that actually, if you can just come 15 minutes later, that you will arrive feeling so much better and so much more ready to get on with your job. It could be small things like that, where you can show there's going to be a benefit for your employer. But yeah, I'll share that link to our webpage on how to ask for flexible working.
And Connor will be sending out a sort of follow-up email to everybody that's here today with some links, and we'll send you the links to the Dad Shift campaign. If you want to come out and strike with dads, if there's any dads here that wants to come out and strike, I think that Dads Rock and Fathers Network Scotland will certainly be at the Parliament on the 11th at 3 o'clock. Again, we'll stick that into the email. Yeah, we'll just thank you, a huge thank you to Jenny for it's been fantastic. I've learned a huge amount actually, and it's been brilliant having you along today. We've been working with Flexibility Works for a very long time actually, so it's lovely to have you come along and share what you've learned. And I know it's putting these reports together is an enormous task, so, and it's lovely to be able to share that information and all that knowledge that you've gleaned. So thank you so much, and thanks everybody else for coming along. I think that we're probably just about out of time, but if you've got any questions specifically for Jenny or myself that you didn't want to put on the chat, just drop us an email and I'll make sure that it gets to the right person and we can take up any questions that you've got. But thanks everyone for taking time out your day on such a beautiful day. And I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much. And we'll see you all. We're on time. I can't believe it, Connor, for the first time ever. We're on time. Thank you ever so much, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.